All right, so about the turn of the 20th century, you have Du Bois, who is going to start competing with Washington to be the leader of the movement. And so you have Du Bois basically becomes the leader of the movement in the North. And he, again, is going to focus on trying to get the black middle class, especially intellectual and social leaders, to try to mobilize other middle class black members of society to try to work for equality. And so in 1905, Du Bois gets together with another Northern activist by the name of John Hope, and they get a bunch of their friends together in Niagara, New York, and they start what's called the Niagara Movement in 1905. Now, at the Niagara Movement, Du Bois ends up being made the spokesperson, and basically these are all the people who disagree with Booker T. Washington that accommodation and segregation are okay, and they basically are going to favor a more militant support of unrestricted voting rights, equal access to economic opportunity, integration, and legal equality. And they start now looking for test cases for this. The leaders who meet there end up forming the NAACP, so the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And they really are the ones who are against Washington's Atlantic Compromise. Instead, they promoted more of an elitist solution. So where Washington had a more bottom-up, a more grassroots attitude towards this of educating poor members of black society, having them learn a vocation, make money, and eventually achieve economic equality, you end up seeing Du Bois and the Niagara Movement members trying to focus more on a top-down kind of solution. So basically they wanted to get the most highly educated, gifted, talented members of black society to prove their equality to whites. And so he called this group of people the talented 10th. And so the most talented 10th of black society, especially in the North, would basically become an example to white society of what blacks could achieve if they had equality. His idea was that then this would lead to African Americans then achieving social and political equality and eventual economic equality. In 1909, Du Bois and Hope officially create the NAACP, and the aim here was to try to mobilize more middle-class members of black society to try to use the courts and to try to find test cases to strike down Plessy versus Ferguson. So really they're looking here for these cases to prove why segregation is unconstitutional. That's going to appeal more to middle-class African Americans, less so sharecroppers and laborers, and eventually it's going to take about 40 years, but finally in 1854 they do find that successful test case in the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Ultimately, Du Bois became fed up with the United States. He became kind of disillusioned with the whole country. In the 1950s, he actually ends up moving to Liberia himself. Now, when all is said and done, African Americans in this period are relatively successful in acquiring more education, more prosperity. The problem with this is that this ends up also increasing resentment towards them. A lot of these progressives that end up resulting from the populist movement as we move into the 20th century now start trying to pass more laws to protect African Americans from themselves as they saw it. They wanted to pass what they call these enlightened laws supporting segregation. They pass more Jim Crow laws. Segregation becomes even more publicly renowned. So we see more segregation in the military, in bathrooms, restaurants, any kind of public accommodations whatsoever in government facilities. And so these efforts here during the period through these Jim Crow laws weren't necessarily designed to hurt African Americans, but by a lot of these white politicians, they really felt they were protecting African Americans from themselves. The problem with this is that they ended up doing more harm than they ended up doing good. But these progressive reforms do ultimately end up decreasing the lynching rate throughout this period that they are in effect. The thing is that a lot of the children of people from this generation, from the 1880s through the 1920s, the ones who end up fighting in World War I, eventually their grandchildren fighting in World War II, become the people who do start the civil rights movement. And so a lot of these ideas and these movements are eventually going to have much longer term consequences than at least in the immediate during this period.